And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of fantastic food safety, food quality, making sure that everything that we eat and enjoy is safe and wholesome and we all love it. And unfortunately, in what we do, not a lot of accolades and gratitude for what it is. But guess what? Myself and Dustin today, we're going to say thanks. We really appreciate all that you do. Good job. Thank you for all of that. If you're new to the chat, welcome. Pull up a chair. My name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And this, of course, is Food Safety Chat Live. And every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, I have the distinct pleasure of bringing an expert on food manufacturing, food safety, and all things food onto the chat to have a conversation with you. And that's what you'll notice that this is different, is this is not a lecture where we're sitting here telling you all the things that you have to do. This is meant to be a transfer of information, and that's what I love about doing this. And I'm really excited about my guest today because one of the things that it's very hard, Dustin, to get people on at the executive level on the chat, right? Scheduling, of course, as you know, from booking on webinars and stuff is always a challenge. But CEOs and executives within food companies, super busy, and it's really hard to get them on the chat. And so I'm very excited for our chat today. And with that, I'll give a brief introduction here. It's kind of hard, I think. I tried to write a good description for you, Dustin, but it's hard because you do so damn much. So Dustin and I worked together at White Wave way back in the day. And Dustin Finkel, here's what I summed it down to: an entrepreneur, a food executive, and adjunct professor at CU. How's that?
That is the quick version. I hate when people ask me to walk me through their their resume because it takes too long nowadays.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the older you get, the longer it takes. One of the things we do, and Tim is on the ball here, and good, he's at home in Tennessee. Is everybody let us know where you're at? I'm always amazed, Dustin. We get people from India and Nigeria and Europe, all over the world, who join us for the chat, which is really amazing. And so, of course, I'm in Loveland, Colorado, where we've been going through, like a lot of the country, right? My friends down in Texas are sending pictures of snow in Dallas, right, which really freaks them out. But here in Colorado, I'm in Loveland, and it's chilly this morning here. It's what do we got? We're at 16, but we're on our way up to 43, which is nice, right? So we got a little snow up here in Loveland. Where are you at, Dustin?
I am in Erie, Colorado, which is about 20 minutes south of you, towards Denver, and about 20 minutes east of Boulder. So for those of you who are not that clear with Colorado.
Elena's in Denver as well. Nice to see Elena here. Good morning. Oh, she's got the little snow emojis, and I like that.
I heard Denver got snow yesterday. We didn't get any up here. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we didn't get any in Loveland either. So very interesting on that side. So, gosh, we got a ton of information here to go over. Georgia, nice to see you, and definitely here for the chat. It looks like members of your team are trying to log in here through the same link as you. They need to go through the LinkedIn invite and view that way. So they can hang out there, but that's not going to work that way. 6 inches of snow in Nashville. Wow, nice. Surprising for that. So one of the things that we do here as we get setting on the chat, and as I had said here a little bit, we got a ton to go over, so we're going to get right to it. So Dustin, please join me in hoisting your beverage of choice with us, everybody. Cheers.
Beverage. I'm going to try and quickly see if I can send an update to that email, but maybe not. So we'll just jump in.
No, that's as we were talking about here before we went live. It's live, right? There's always something that goes on. Wow, Elena got 4 inches of snow in Denver. Wow, crazy. So as everybody is watching here with Dustin's background, just look at all of the different brands he has been associated with. And of course, over his left shoulder, you see Horizon Organic back there, which I'm very familiar with as well. Tons of good food and good products that we all know.
Yeah, I'm going to give up on my attempt to try and find the email I sent out, but let's just jump into it.
All right, let's see. I can kick Mike from the studio. Goodbye, Mike. Sorry. There we go. So one of our rituals, and I'll apologize in this in advance, Dustin, but you got to go through it. Everybody else does. Is the dad joke? Are you ready? Are you ready for the dad joke?
I'm the captain of dad jokes, so let's hear it.
Okay, Dustin. Why were Snap, Crackle, and Pop terrified after watching the news?
I give up.
They heard that a serial killer was on the loose.
Oh yeah. What did the fish say when it hit the wall?
I don't know. What did the fish say when it hit the wall?
Damn.
I love it. You're the first guest to hit me back with a dad joke, so I love it.
It used to be all over my old website for Kapop. We had dad jokes. It was kind of what I became known for.
I like that one this morning. So as we jump into the chat here, serial killer. Yep. So just from a background standpoint, we got to hit this, and I'll apologize, right, with my slaughtering of it, at least a high level of your background. But for the new guests, we always do this on the chat. Dustin, is give us a little bit more on your background and you.
Yeah, as Duncan's kind of making fun of me, you can kind of see it on my back wall. I started my career actually in investment banking at Goldman Sachs, and I always bring that up simply because I do approach everything with a very analytical financial bent. And so as I think about the marketing and the creative strategies, it always comes from that ROI, P&L, cash flow mentality. And I think with a lot of companies, and we'll probably get into this and how it can impact QA, but having that kind of financial mindset is really, really critical. I went from there essentially to business school at Northwestern, shifted into consumer packaged goods, where I became, I worked on General Mills. My kind of claim to fame with General Mills is I was part of the team that launched the first nationwide gluten-free product ever with gluten-free checks, which was really cool. And went smaller, worked at White Wave, Horizon Organic, helped commercialize DHA and some other things. And then I essentially a lot of things, but ultimately got hired by private equities, started my own food company, Kapop, which you can see behind me. We were featured on Shark Tank, which if you want to see me make a fool of myself in front of millions of people, feel free to look at that. And then now, after doing some interim CEO stints and some private equity gigs, I have now stumbled my way into fractional support. And I kind of joke, I'm everything from a fractional CEO to a fractional janitor and everything in between. So I like to think that I have a pretty good understanding of every aspect of the P&L of the business and can help businesses avoid the landmines that we often face in the food industry.
Yeah, and I think, and that's a great segue into our conversation today, because we were talking about this a little bit in the green room here before we went on, is you have hyper specialized functions within companies, right? Microbiologists and engineers, and who really are subject matter experts in particular areas. But if you're running a company, you can't do that, right? You have to rely upon those experts, and you have to take a big picture look at the world. And if the CEO and the leadership team in a food company is not thinking in terms of 5 years out, you're going to find yourselves in trouble pretty quick. So if the CEO is sitting there currently, right, they're thinking, okay, geez, Trump's taking office here pretty shortly. He's threatening tariffs. How's that impact my business? What type of moves can our company make to make sure that we're not impacted by this? How can we shuffle those pieces around? So it's really kind of around the range of tactical versus strategic, I guess, maybe a good way to summarize it.
Well, I like to, and I do think it's really important for resources as part of the team to understand that we hire QA specialists or QA managers or QA leads or marketing and paid media specialists or, everything down the line, because we aren't experts at everything. We shouldn't be experts at everything. And I've told you this before, and I've said this on other podcasts, which is one of the reasons I think I struggled quite a bit with my own company, was I continued to stay in the weeds too long and too far, even as we got bigger and bigger and bigger. Mm-hmm. And I lost sight of that 3-year plan. I lost sight of the big growth trajectory that we could go on. And so ultimately, I think as we kind of move forward in this conversation, you'll hear a lot about how specialists need to recognize that their leaders don't have that expertise. That doesn't mean that's a bad thing. That's why we are employed. And as a result, we need to think about how to properly communicate that specialty in a way that makes sense for the executives. And within quality assurance, that is a very specialized world. There's a lot of detailed evidence that you need to manage and think about that really the CEO or the executive or even the ops leader is not thinking about on a day-to-day basis. And so I know that creates tension and problems, and we can talk about how to probably alleviate some of that as we go forward.
Right. And there was always a good rule of thumb, and I always used to teach this to my managers and directors, was never get in a position where you have more than 5, maybe 6 direct reports. And why is that? Well, you can't keep track of it, right? You need to have that correct level of detail. And to your point, Dustin, which is a great one, I want to reemphasize that, is if you have too few reports, you're going to micromanage. If you have too many reports, you're going to get lost because you don't know what they're up to. So then you're going to be in this constant state of stress. And it's the same with the CEO in the company. There's a specific reason why the CEO only has 5 or 6 direct reports, right? So ops, sales, marketing, legal, communications, maybe, you know, that's it, right? And the CEO relies upon that core team to do the same thing. And that's why organizations are always set up in that hierarchy so that that information can get communicated correctly. And I don't care who you are, right? And actually, I mean, when you look at Elon Musk, part of it is how does he do what he does? I was watching a podcast who was talking about Elon, and he likes to play video games, right? And so the guy was talking about this. He's like, think about this. Elon Musk runs all these giant companies with hyper technical abilities, right? I mean, gosh, grabbing ships with chopsticks, and he plays video games. And I was watching the other day he was live streaming playing a video game with like 300,000 people watching. So on this particular video game, I forget which one it is, you know, maybe people in the chat know. He's one of the top players in the world on that game. And the guy that was talking, he's like, you don't understand, these people who are good at these games, that's all they do, right? And they become hyper focused, to your point, on building that skill set at being good at that game. He's one of the top players in the world. This guy's like, that's unfathomable that he's able to do that. And it just
I think if anyone tries to be Elon Musk, though, that is a failure waiting to happen, probably for most people. Maybe not everyone. But
yeah, exactly. I mean, and you know, love him or hate him, I don't care. The fact that we're on the planet with him at this time is really cool, right? Just watching this guy.
I think he might be evidence that there's supernatural beings out there. He might be one of them. But
I think you're probably right. And with that, and I apologize for kind of that run off into the weeds myself, but one of the complaints, Dustin, and this is kind of the core of our conversation today, is as the head of quality, right, everybody is vying for the attention of the CEO, right? Trying to get on his calendar, trying to make sure that she understands what you're up to. And a lot of times, especially within quality, you're not necessarily having a direct line of communication to the CEO. You're probably part of the operational group, which is then reporting up into the CEO. And I hear this complaint time and time and time again from quality people, is that, oh, senior leadership won't listen to what I need to get done. Oh, they don't care what's going on in quality. It's not my fault because they don't understand what we're doing. What's kind of your take on that from the other side of the table?
So as we talked, and you know, we did some pre-discussion, and I want to call this out that nothing I'm going to say is meant to be insulting, but it might be direct, which is, I think there's stereotypes out there, right? And both about CEOs and execs, as well as quality or any other specialty in the industry. One thing I will say is that quality assurance tends to think in black and white. I think, generally speaking. And one of the reasons I get that is because there is some black and white. Does it pass tests? Is it safe? Is it going to hurt our consumers? I mean, there are some black and white things that we need to think about. But most of life, as we know, lives in the gray. And I think the best quality assurance people I've seen, just like lawyers, share the risk, share the concern, and then talk about what we need to do as an opportunity and an impact for the business, not just this is a problem, we need to fix it. So that's the first thing, is I think really thinking about the black and white versus the gray. Now, there are instances where it is black and white, like God forbid, there's a recall or there's something else. I mean, yes, there are very SQF level safety issues that are black and white, but I'd say 90% of the issues that happen on a day-to-day basis are not black and white. They have impacts, they have opportunities, and we need to talk about that. So the first thing is to start thinking in the gray. The second thing is going back to what I said at the beginning, which is we are not in the weeds every day. So the more technical you get, quite frankly, the more we're probably going to tune out, right? We want to know what the problem is, what the solutions might be, how those solutions will impact the business, good or bad, and then how we move forward from that. And I think ultimately that's how anybody in an organization should communicate upwards, whether it's to your manager or it's to the executives. Risk reward is another piece that I would think about. I mentioned at the beginning the ROI piece, which is what is the financial benefit to the organization? So there is not a area of the business that doesn't have an ROI measurement as part of it. So ultimately, if you think about hiring people, well, I want to hire somebody else. What's the financial impact of the business? What can they offset? What's the improvement they can do, etc. So I really want people to take away that the better you can communicate up in the gray, the better you can communicate in terms of here's the problem and opportunities without causing it being black and white. I think the more successful you're going to be.
Right. Well, and I think a good add on to that is as well is no one likes to be surprised, because if in quality you're holding on to problems and only communicating it upwards at the last minute when it's at the crisis stage, that's not going to make people happy either, right? It's like, oh, hey, yeah, we've had this problem for 6 months, and oh, guys, it looks like it's going to be a recall now. Wait a minute, why are we just talking about this now?
Right.
You've known about this for 6 months, right? That's a recipe for failure as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, the other piece that's really important, and this is for every part of the business. And it's really hard because, like all of us, we all probably started at some low level, and I use that in quotes, but worked our way up. We all were in our little bubble. And I think the more you can realize that there's so much more to the organization than maybe what you see or even know. Now, whether that's good or bad, that's a separate conversation. But there's more going on than you probably realize. Mm-hmm. So if you can start seeing the bigger picture of the business, it's really important. There's always the joke about the conflict and tension between sales and ops, right? And QA and all these things. One thing I used to preach, and again, I'm a marketing sales minded individual, but the one thing I used to preach is any for-profit business has one goal, and it's to sell more stuff. That is our job. If we don't sell more stuff, we don't have a job. If we don't sell more stuff, you don't have a job. We don't have resources. That doesn't mean doing it recklessly. That doesn't mean doing it fraudulently and all that stuff, but we need to sell more. And so when there are issues or there are problems, again, I'm going to pretty much going forward just assume we're not talking about recall type stuff necessarily, unless you specifically bring it up. Think about the bigger picture. What's the impact on the business? What's the impact on the sales? A lot of times I got into issues where the simple solution is we should stop. We need to stop. We need to do this. We need to fix this. We need to work on this. It's like, yeah, in an ideal world, that would be amazing. But then I don't sell for 2 months. We're probably going to lose a lot of sales and probably people are going to lose their jobs. And I used to take it pretty heavily, and I still do, that firing somebody was the worst possible thing I could do, especially when it was because of business performance, because ultimately that was my fault, right? And so I'm always thinking about those type of issues.
Yeah. Well, and part of this, and I think, Dustin, this is part of human nature. It's very easy for people to minimalize the efforts of other people, right? The sales guys, they just go out to fancy dinners and yuck it up with the buyers from the retailers. And man, it'd be amazing to be in sales. You go out, you make a big sale, and everybody in the company celebrates you. Marketing, amazing. Wow, I'd love to work in marketing, right? You get to create these crazy labels and come up with all these claims. And what do you really do in marketing? Right? And they do the same with quality, right? So then it turns around and the marketing and sales people say, oh yeah, those quality people, they're just, black and white, stick in the mud people who don't understand anything. And yeah, let them sit in their lab and do their thing. It really doesn't matter, right? And the groups don't communicate. And that's the big problem in companies is you get these different silos of these different fiefdoms that think that their function is what's driving the company. They don't understand everybody's there for a reason. And getting out of your bubble is so important.
Yeah, I want to touch on real quick because I'm seeing Cortland and LinkedIn user about repeat sales. And something you'll hear me say, and Bryan heard me say this in the speech I gave, which is I want to make it 100% clear that I believe quality impacts sales, 100%. And anyone who's ever worked with me will hear that. I think I coined a phrase now that Bryan is taking, because quality impacts demand, right? Yes. Which is this. I have this philosophy, and this is especially true at small companies. For every complaint you get, there's at least 10 more you're not getting. And as a small company, you get one chance to get that consumer to try your product. the example I always use is Oreos, right? If someone has a bad Oreo, they're probably going to come back and give Oreo the benefit of the doubt because it's Oreo and whatever. If someone tried Kapop and had a bad Kapop experience, I'm not getting them back. And I'm not getting their friends back, and I'm not getting all the people they told about. So I want to be 100% clear that I think there's real importance to quality. There's two parts to the quality equation, though. There's food safety and food quality. And I think a lot of what I've been referring to so far is a little bit about food safety because it's nuanced, right? There's things that are black and white safety issues, and there's things that are gray safety issues. Quality is very similar. Quality is even harder to measure. I mean, one of the things and use a Kapop again as an example, our most popular product was a vegan cheddar puff. Mm-hmm. We used to get into a lot of conversations around puffs, the density, the size, the coating, the bite. It's really hard to quantify that. Now we could and use some type of measurements to do some of it, but that was opinion based. And so we would have conversations. What's the impact about letting this batch go? What's the impact about letting that? And I think, again, if QA starts thinking about it from the sales avenue, and you're right. And I love that Cortland and the other person brought that up because I 100% agree that quality impacts demand. We need to make sure we're executing flawlessly. That doesn't mean, though, especially with smaller companies, that we can shut down the ship. We need to learn on the fly. We need to be forward thinking, and we need to be thinking about what are the levers we can pull and communicate that without creating distress and problems in the sales organization.
Right, and that's a really good point. And this is what I view as one of the key functions of quality on the product quality side. And Patty, I see your question there. We'll get to that in a second. Is that part of our job is to get that information to the organization. One of the biggest problems I've seen in food companies is if they get too insular, if they start looking at things too internally, right? So you're the CEO and I'm working in quality. I work for you, Dustin. And I put together a product tasting and we all get together and we all huddle around the table and we're looking at the products and we're waiting for you to tell us if it's good or not. I don't care. You're the CEO. You're not the target market, right? You have input, but you should not be making the decision. You need the information from me that says, okay, for K-pie, here are the main things that our consumers care about. They care about texture, right? If the popcorn is stale, right? We get tons of complaints for that. If the flavor is incorrect, too high or too low, right? Here's the main drivers that the consumer is looking for on that product. And so hearkening back to our past with the Horizon Organic Kids with the DHA, we were both in the company developing that. And we found out that with DHA, you have to be super careful with the DHA. If you don't add it correctly to the milk, if it's not the right composition, you can get this weird fishy flavor. Yeah. And oh my God, would we get complaints. When we first started tweaking this and going into the marketplace, and Horizon was one of the first people to figure this out. And man, those complaints would hit hard. So part of my job was, as getting that information to you as the CEO to say, hey, listen, DHA, we got to be super, super careful on flavor, right? If we want complaints, this is how you get it, so that the organization understands it. And I think that's a key point in what quality sometimes forgets. We need to help you get information that's forward-looking. Hey, that's great that we put out the quality report for last month. Okay, everybody already knows what happened last month. Is that really providing value to you as the CEO?
You stole the words right out of my mouth. I was about to say forward-looking objectives, right? Because we all do these monthly reports, and I used to drive me crazy, especially when I had to put them together around, here's what just happened last month. That's great. I can't do anything about last month. Now, it's a bit arbitrary because there are things you can do about it. But I will say the more you can start thinking forward-looking, what are the trends that if X, then Y, right? What are the things that we're seeing in quality that we notice if we continue to go down this path, it will lead to a decrease in sales? You talk about a decrease in sales or increase in cost to executive, you're going to catch their attention. You're always going to catch their attention. If you talk about consumer problems, you're most likely going to catch their attention. I do think, though, one thing I want to note, and this is important, is understanding where your CEO or executive or whoever you're talking to came from, how they grew up. So as an example, I grew up in a financially minded marketing organization, right? So I started with investment banking, and then I worked in big CPG, and I went the brand management path. That's my brain mindset. Okay, well, what does that mean? How to talk to Dustin might be different than how to talk to Sarah, who grew up in an engineering technical world, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why when you see some products from tech companies, you wonder if there was any marketing or strategy involved because the user experience is so bad. But that's a separate conversation. The point I'm making is it's not only just about the marketing and the sales, it's also understanding what communication will work. Someone mentioned managing up. That's the precipice of managing up, which is understanding who you're managing to, what triggers work with them, what type of communication they like to hear. I, for instance, like direct, quick conversations, like to the point. I want to know what we do, what we need to do, and what we're going to do about it. Some people might like the storytelling. Some people might want the technical. So I actually think, going back on what I said before, the number one thing you should probably think about is understanding who you're talking to, what is important to them. I mean, this goes back to core sales, right? And how you can deliver upon that message to trigger what you need to happen based on their needs and their concerns and their anxieties.
Right. And yeah, stepping back and putting yourself in their perspective. So kind of the analogy Dustin I use on this is it's kind of like the angel and the devil sitting on your shoulder. Part of my job is to be those two characters for the CEO. To say, hey, things are going good. We're doing good on this thing. Things are looking great. I'm really, really happy. On the other side, it's not too happy. This is kind of trending in a direction that's not good. We probably need to get aware of this, right? So that I'm giving you those guidances from a quality standpoint of, is the ship drifting in a direction we don't like?
I'm going to counter that a little bit, Brian, just not to disagree, but just to push the thought of the boy who cries wolf phenomenon too, right?
Yes.
Which is being careful. I don't know if anyone even reads that book anymore and knows that parable, but the idea, I'm sure most of us do, which is if I keep hearing the same complaint and same problem over and over and over again, I just tune it out, right? And that's all of us. We all do that. And so I do think it's being thoughtful about your approach of how and when to bring things up. This is like, with any of your spouses or partners or life relationships, if someone's in a bad mood or had a tough day and then you bring up an issue, probably not going to go well, right? It's also finding the right time and communication method that will get that point across. So I do think it's important to raise those issues, but I think if you become that little gnat that's just bop, 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 you're just going to get tuned out because it's just another complaint from X person about some other problem. And then that's probably what leads to bigger issues because the executive didn't listen to you, you weren't communicating correctly, and then the whole thing just blows up.
No, that's a really good clarification. Yeah, it's just an and on what I was saying.
Yeah.
I mean, so part of this too, to your point on context, is let's say, for example, that I want to come and talk with the CEO about some stuff that I think is important, but 3 days out is the meeting with the executives with the board of directors. That's your focus, right? If I come in and start talking with you about stuff and you're focused in on preparing that information for the board of directors, you're going to be like, what? Right? It's like, why are you bothering me now? Go away.
It's literal. I mean, I've literally had that experience and probably literally said those words. So it's true. That's again, learning the managing up piece. But, one other area I think, I'd love to hit on, Ryan, if it's okay, is also going back to the forward looking, which is, I am not sure in the quality assurance world, and I apologize if this does happen, I just never saw it directly, was more of goal setting, right? I feel like a lot of QA, and this is all of our jobs, is firefighting, right? There's firefighting issues, and we all deal with that constantly, and every day there's something new that happens. But I don't know if I recall seeing a proactive plan. Now, for those of you guys who do SQF audits and stuff, there's this whole document. We plan, we know the SQF audit's coming in 3 months. Here's our objectives. Here's our plans. If you think about bringing that type of mentality and plans to the broader organization as here's my goals for this quarter. Here's my goals for this year. Here's the tactical ways I'm going to address those things. I think it'd be much better suited for an executive that can measure you against those things, is not worried about the latest issue. It's like, okay, we agreed on these goals. We agreed on these concerns. We agreed on these resources. I'm going to measure you, X person, against those things as we go forward this year. I do think forward looking, again, is another opportunity for improvement.
Yeah. And sometimes from a quality standpoint, that can be a challenge. I know that you look at the objectives for the company for that year. And it's okay, here's our sales goals, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll look at that information and say, well, geez, how do I fit into that from a quality side? Because sometimes it's difficult to link those things, because a lot of times, as we kind of talk about in the intro for the chat, it's just it's assumed that, all these things are going to happen for quality. They're going to maintain, they're going to have low complaint rates. We're not going to have recalls. These are negatives, right? And a lot of times it's hard to measure negatives in those situations.
Right. I mean, quality assurance, unfortunately, you mentioned it at the very beginning, is a lot of times a thankless job, right? It's until a problem happens. I'd like to think that I tried, especially when we passed the SQF audit or whatever, and I try and do accolades and bonuses and all those types of things. But I do think if you see, for instance, I like to oversimplify examples. If you see that the company is saying we need to grow 100%, and to grow 100%, we need to add a line, we need to add this many more flavors. I think that's where a quality assurance person can get involved with the ops leadership as a whole and say, okay, here's the reality of those things. The CEO exec doesn't want to hear about the nitty-gritty areas that need to be happened, but these are the resources and requirements to be successful in executing that. That allows the ops leader, QA, well, QA shouldn't really roll up to ops, but if the QA person up to whoever they roll up to can communicate these are the objectives needed to satisfy the goals of the organization, not in a complaining way. And by the way, this is true of marketing, sales, and every part of the organization. Not in I need these resources, it's too much. It's here's how I can successfully manage the goals of the company, and here's how that ROI is going to play back in terms of not only our top line, but our bottom line costs. That's a way that every executive should at least respond positively to.
Right. No, that's a great way to summarize it. So, Patty, I did promise you we get to your question, so we'll circle back to this. From the food safety side, when do you need to draw a hard line versus when you need to adapt and stay agile to keep production moving? Well, really, I think this gets back to your point, Dustin, which is separating out those two worlds, right? So the food safety world versus the food quality world. Quality is a business decision, right? And to your point, there's a risk continuum to the business that the executives need to understand, and quality is hugely important in providing that information. Food safety is more black and white, right? And so part of that, and one of the conversations, I mentioned this on the chat before, Dustin, I'm curious to get your take on this, is one of the things I would do when I would start with a new food company is I would sit down with the CEO and say, okay, hey, nice to meet you. Let's get to know each other a little better. Here's how I approach food safety. If there's a food safety crisis in the company, a legitimate, we've got listeria, something really terrible, you have to understand as the CEO, you're not really in charge of the company at that point in time. I am. Right? As the recall coordinator, my job in that is to get us back to where we need to be and survive the crisis. And everything in the company needs to support that efforts. Everything else stops. Nothing else matters. And part of my conversation with that is I want to gauge the reaction of the CEO to that question. How would you respond to that question?
I can answer how I was just responding to thinking about you saying that to me. I remember those conversations, and if I recall correctly, because it's been a minute, everyone in a recall, God forbid, has their roles and responsibilities and their tactics. I was very passionate, and this does come from my days in Horizon in particular, because we used to have a little product, I don't know if you remember, called Little Blends way back then. And, we had crazy QA. Actually, this is a great example. So this was early in my career when I didn't really understand anything about QA. And I remember Little Blends, it had a very short shelf life. And then QA, I'm going to say QA, I might have been wrong, but QA mandated a 2-week hold or something to make sure that we did all the tests that kids wouldn't get hurt. And as the marketing and salesperson on the role, I was like, this is killing us. You just took away 50% of our shelf life, and this is terrible. As I got more experienced and more knowledgeable, what I understood was we were preventing issues from happening and making sure we were taking care of our consumers first. As I've grown older in my career, consumers come first. You mentioned adjunct teaching. I'm about to start a semester next Wednesday at University of Colorado. The very first thing I talk about in class after going through the syllabus is the number one most important thing in any business is the consumer. That's it. It's a be all end all. All of these things revolve around the consumer. And so going to answer your question about a recall, again, I think there's also different types of recalls. So again, there's gray in this. Is it a recall because if someone eats this, they're going to die, right? I mean, God forbid, that's the worst kind. Are we concerned about an allergen issue, right? That's kind of the next level. And then there's these levels. And I do think, again, any CEO who is truly caring about the consumer would ultimately understand that if in a recall scenario, the ops, QA, and FDA are in charge of that situation.
Right.
Very long-winded answer, but
yeah, I mean, and part of these lessons these are part of the lessons that I've learned in my career as well is, a CEO is a CEO because they're in charge. They're used to being in charge of things, and their natural tendency is to jump in, right, and lead the effort and stuff like that, and that can be wrong in that situation. So no, that's a perfect answer, right? And so part of this is, again, we're back to context and communication. Is the CEO of a company is hired because they're good at running companies, right? They're good at managing the P&L, acquiring new customers, growing the business, acquiring new brands. That doesn't mean you have food experience, right? There's amazing CEOs who come into the food industry from automotive or other spaces because they're good at running companies, not because they understand food. And if you have a CEO in that position, it's not good or bad. It's just a different perspective, which actually can be good. You have to understand that in quality. And back to our points earlier, is help to educate up and give them an understanding, because what you just communicated, right, is pretty rare, right, for CEOs to understand at that level of information. So if I was working for you and I came to you and we had the conversation we just shared with everyone, I'd be like, good, all right, awesome.
Bryan, I do think there's this again is types of people, right? So I'm going to speak for myself. I can't speak for anybody else, but I used to tell my employees that if they bring me an issue, I'm going to get involved, right? Mm-hmm. Just my tendency. You bring me a problem, I'm going to try and get in and solve it. It's not a good or bad thing. It's just who I am. And I've tried to get better at it. But, so I will say a good leader, and something I really loved, is when I found the parts of my organization that I could literally know that I didn't have to worry about. And so this is where, Bryan, and I respect you a ton, is if you, part of my reaction to you comes from our relationship, the trust we built. So if you come to me and be like, Dustin, when there's a recall, I own it. This is my responsibility. I'm like, Bryan, thank God. Good. Yeah. I don't want I want to be kept informed, and I'll ask questions, but that's your world. Whereas if it's somebody who, and I'm going to again oversimplify and over stereotype, complains constantly, I don't think sees the bigger picture, is constantly in the black and white, you're going to get a different reaction from me. I'm going to be like, nope, I'm going to be there with you every step of the way. Yep. And you're going to be frustrated, and I'm going to be frustrated. So yeah. I do think this goes back to so much of business is the EQ part of it. And I'm not an EQ expert by any means. It's been a growth area for me, but I will say the more trust, the more relationship, the more building. I think anyone in business should really understand. We used to call it in business school, it's called MORS. I think it's management organizational strategy. And it used to be like throwaway classes. I wish we spent more time on those classes, how to interact with people, how to communicate, how to understand what challenges they're facing, what stresses they're facing. Because God willing, as my company got bigger, I've run everything from $0 companies to $100 million companies. And I can tell you, it was the best when I knew I had X person in a role that I didn't have to worry about at all. It was the greatest feeling in the world.
Oh, I love it. And so you said the word in there twice during that description, and it's absolutely perfect, is trust, yeah. Right? So the CEO has to be able to trust that you've got it, right? And that it's one less thing that you don't have to worry about on a day-to-day basis. And we know this from our teams as well, right? That there's people that you can go to on the quality team and say, hey, Bill, I need you to go out and do this. You got it, boss. Done. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to check up. I know that Bill's going to go take care of it. If there's any problems, he's going to give me a call and we can work through it. Perfect, right? And a lot of times in quality, I think a lot of times, Dustin, there's a lot of micromanagers, right? They feel that they have to control everything, every little aspect of everything. And all that does is build resentment on your team. And back to your point, now I'm communicating to my team that I don't trust them, to do their jobs. And that's a really bad spot to be.
Well, and I would be honest about that. I told employees all the time that I actually start with trust. Mm-hmm. And but you could lose it quickly. I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm like my EQ, but you started with all the trust in the world because I hired you. And I think Jill just said, yeah, because your IQ got you in the door. I trust you. But the second you damaged that and I started getting involved, it's hard to build back that trust. And I would also tell you that if you saw me, I would tell employees, if you see me micromanaging you, probably a bad sign, because I don't want to, but it means I have lost my trust or I'm losing my trust or whatever, right? And this is depending on skill set and level of experience, and there's a lot of nuances to it. But I do think, it's funny, it's a QA conversation. And again, we spent a lot of our time here talking about management communication. And I do think that's really the difference here. When you and I spoke together at an event for Patty at Alaritech, good call up, amazing company. And one of the things during your speech, so my speech was kind of on this stuff, right? And then you got in and you were rightfully so more in the technical world. And I remember listening to some of the people in the room ask you questions that were so technical. And I was like, my thinking in that moment was, I've had people come up and try and communicate with me in that same fashion. You guys are super technical. You have all this knowledge and expertise, but it would be like me going to you and saying, I'm analyzing accounts receivable ratios and, we're looking at the, things that aren't necessarily relevant to you, and you're going to gloss over versus saying there's a sales issue. Okay, got it. There's a quality assurance issue. Got it. So again, I do think so much of, and why I think you invited me here is, it's not that I know quality. There's no one there's every single person on this call probably knows quality better than me. I'm on this call because it's about how to communicate quality in a way that gets the results, because I know there's so much frustration in the lack of receptivity to quality assurance issues.
Right. And when we were preparing for this chat, I brought up a story on ROI and how I was successful early in my career. So I think it's good to reiterate that story for everybody, because I think this is very illustrative of how this process goes. So I was a microbiologist working in a lab, and back in the day, right, a lot of tests, they were all manual. And so, I mean, picture what you see with the stock photos on the internet, right? With the guy with the petri dish and they're streaking on the plate. That was my life, doing that all day long. And new methods started coming out that were rapid methods that would cut the test from 5 days down to 3 days. I'm just like, oh, amazing. My life will be so much easier if I can get my test done faster. Problem was, it cost more. Right? Of course, it costs more. You got to buy the machine, you got to buy the little kits, all these type of things. Much more expensive than the manual method. I think it was about a 3x cost. So I went to my boss and said, "Hey, Edith, I want this really super cool new method we've been playing with in the lab, and it's amazing." First thing out of her mouth, Dustin, what's it cost? Yeah. Well, yeah, we got to buy the equipment. It's gonna be around $30,000 for the equipment. And she's, all right, what's the cost per test? Well, it's about 3x what we're doing now. No, we're not going to do that, right? I'm like, oh, right, and I went away. Got thinking about it, and I was like, because a big chunk, and this was for a dairy company, you do a lot of salmonella testing on dry powders. And when you're testing that, to your point, you have to hold this stuff. You can't release it into the market. So picture these gigantic mozzarella plants producing hundreds of thousands of pounds of whey protein, lactose, sweet whey, all has to go and sit in a warehouse until I say it's okay to ship it. I went to the logistics guys and said, "Hey guys, how much does it cost to store this product?" And they're like, "Oh, well, per pallet, in-out storage, all the technical stuff that the logistics guys do." Okay, well, on a monthly basis, what's our overall cost of the company for that? And they gave me this giant number. And I said, wow, okay, if we were able to release this product 60% faster and increase our turnover for our inventory, what would that mean dollar-wise? And they're like, oh my God, right? So they figured it out for me. And they came back and they said, well, Bryan, that's going to save the company about $300,000 a month. I'm like, holy crap. So I put together a nice little presentation, went back to Edith, showed her the presentation. I didn't even get done with the presentation, and she said, do it, buy the equipment now.
Exactly. I mean, and it takes, the hard part about what you just did is it takes time, work, research, and a lot of times we're busy, we're overwhelmed. But anytime you want to increase costs, and I do, again, to call Patty out again, I've talked to him about this with selling Alera, which is you don't want to just show the benefit. You want to show the benefit in terms of cost, right? Because everything we do, we want costs more money. I want to hire somebody, that costs more money. I want to implement this new technology, it costs more money. But if it costs less than it makes for the company, or it's reverse in your case, the costs offset each other, it's an easy decision, right? And I think the more you start approaching every decision that way, I used to talk to people about this, especially with hiring people. You can quantify the benefit of hiring anybody. every situation is different, and I can't really give an example necessarily on the spot for this, but if you think about the benefit that person is going to bring to the organization, what are they offsetting, or how are they driving incremental sales?
Yeah.
If you can't answer those questions, don't ask for an incremental person, right? It's that simple.
Right. And in that example, let's say that I want a new person in my organization, and part of your objectives within the company. So you put together the objectives as the CEO for 2025. One of those objectives is acquire a new brand, right? So you're in M&A mode, and you want to go out and bring a new brand into the portfolio. My job in quality is to say, how can I support that? And so part of that would be, okay, well, I need to go out and help Dustin as the CEO understand risk. So if you're purchasing a new brand, it's much more than simply the financials, right? And a lot of times that's how companies are purchased, right? They put the information in a room and they look at the multiples and they figure out the sale price. And then you start finding out where the skeletons are hid after you make the purchase. And then everybody's like, oh, why did we buy this company? Why not help the acquisition group from a food safety quality standpoint up front and identify those risks so they can build that into their process of acquisition? And when they're figuring out their pricing for that purchase, if there's, let's say that you need to do some capital improvements in the plant because there's some serious issues. If that team understands that and you understand it as a CEO, then you can bring that into the negotiation. Huge value to the company.
Well, I also, a lot of things I talk about the scientific method a lot, right? Your hypothesis, and then validating or invalidating your hypothesis, right? I think with any level of that. So in your example, the hard part would be that you come back to the CEO and be like, look, there's plenty of examples that demonstrate these type of issues that if we don't identify are going to cost the company millions of dollars. In the CEO's mind, they're probably like, well, yeah, I'll take that risk. It's like the kid who doesn't think they're ever going to die or get hurt or whatever, right? You fear more of what you lost after you get it than before you get it, right? And so as a result, one of the things I talk about is if you think that's true, how can you test and learn it? How can you inch into the deep end versus just jumping in? This is again with hiring. One of the things I counsel a lot of people on is start slow. Hire a consultant, hire somebody external that can be, yes, it's more expensive on a per capita basis, but in total, you're not spending that much versus hiring somebody and the risks involved with that. Let's bring somebody on, let's test this concept. In your particular case, there's probably so many case studies that you can bring. So ultimately, the more quantitative you can make a decision, the better. And it kind of goes back on my black and white thing. These are the things that are black and white that make your life easier, which is dollars and cents, cost, sales, cost versus cost. Those are very easy decisions to make versus, hey, these tests are going to be better, or this is cooler, or I think this is going to help. Yeah, I don't have time for that. I don't want to spend more money. No CEO ever wants to spend more money, ever, right? So that's the other thing. It's like in marketing, the thing that drove marketers crazy, and it still happens every day at big companies, is the easiest thing to cut is a marketing budget in a lot of cases. But we need to sell more. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, how do those balance? Yeah.
So we used to get frustrated. It's just like me coming to you and saying, we need to cut quality assurance, but I need the safety protocols to increase by 10%. You're gonna be like, what? Right? So same type of methodology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you had written in the notes here when we were preparing on best decisions for the company. And you had three parameters that you look at, which I think kind of fit in here, right? Which is context, key issues, and opportunity.
Yep. Yeah. So this is actually coaching I do just in general with people, which is assume, and I don't know if someone put this in the chat actually already, but it's like I always call it the USA Today version of what the issue is, right? I want to know the cliff notes, whatever way you want to call it, which is what's the context? Because again, a lot of times this has been your whole world. I've been focused on this issue, and then you bring it to somebody and they're like, what are you talking about? I have no context, right? Quick context, quick opportunity, and then how are you going to solve it, right? And then typically, what is the cost or implications and things like that. But the more you can create that in a digestible fashion, it's what we've all been taught. Don't bring a problem without a solution. Just context, opportunity, and solution will solve a lot of problems.
Right. Well, and circling back to what you had said earlier as well, Dustin, is that the CEO is in that position because they need to make decisions based upon risk evaluation. If you give the CEO limited or no context evaluations of information, it's going to be really hard for them to figure out risk.
Yeah, and looking at Austin's question, the ROIs of theoreticals are always the hardest, right? Which is how do you do an ROI of something else? So one of the jobs I do a lot for companies is I forecast for them. I create forecasts and financial models for them. And ultimately, I always say this, every forecast you've ever done in your life is 100% wrong, right? There's never a forecast that's right. Even if you're close, and I like to think I'm really good at forecasting and I get close, but it's never going to be right. Here's the difference though. When you're forward looking, right, and you're trying to evaluate these things, the more important aspects are the assumptions that you're bringing into that forecast and how you came up with those assumptions. So Austin, in your case, and I'm doing this off the top of my head and I'd want to think about this more, but I would look at, number one, I'd look at incidences that are related to your business, to your criteria and the cost that those have had on the business. Now, a lot of times CEOs going to be like, yeah, that's never going to happen to us, right? But then bringing direct implications back to the business. Well, it's interesting. The reason I'm saying that is because if you look at, let's use Boar's Head as an example, and I don't know anything about what actually happened, so everything I'm about to say is made up in my head. But if you look at 2 years ago, the path on Boar's Head was that they ignored this, and then they ignored this, and then they ignored this. They didn't put in processes for this. These are the assumptions I put in. These are the parameters around those assumptions, and this is how I came up with my number, my answer, my cost, etc. I'm not saying it's going to be successful. A lot of times my forecasts are rejected, but the best I can do is say, these are the key assumptions I've made and how I made those assumptions. So as an example for those, a lot of fundraising is done in companies. The forecasts that always fail, the hockey stick, right? Everyone has a hockey stick. Every forecast is a hockey stick.
Yeah,
that's fine. Hockey stick's not the problem. How did you get to the hockey stick? Well, next year I'm going to double 100%. Why? Because we're going to double 100%. Okay, that's one answer. This is how I would typically answer. We're going to double 100% because I'm in August and in April, the reset windows. We already have had conversations with, I'm going on sales rant here, but we've had conversations with Kroger. We're in conversations where we believe we're going to get 50% based on the conversations of these stores for King Soopers in this region. We believe based on every one of our competition that we're going to turn at 3 units per store per week. That's going to extrapolate to Y. That's going to cost us in marketing and slotting and ops and all that stuff, Z. That's how we got to this number. Very big difference been like, we're just going to grow 100% versus here are the 15 levels of due diligence I did to get to that 100% growth. And I would do the same thing, Austin. Thank you for the note, but I would do the same thing with his assumptions are critical. And I think across every part of the organization, people forget about doing the detailed work to get there. And unfortunately, it's because it's a lot of work. Now, we have a friend called AI nowadays that can help with a lot of that. I'm going to tell you guys all of this off the record. Don't repeat it. My favorite comment of the year for myself is that I was putting my syllabus together yesterday, and my statement on the use of AI and how not to use AI, I created by using AI. So I thought that was really funny. But how to create a statement about not using AI. But the point being is AI is such a powerful toolkit that in today's world, the access to information and finding assumptions and information is so impressive that if you're not using it, you are so behind the 8 ball. So behind.
No, definitely. And so relative to food safety, we've talked about AI here on the chat as well. Is like, if you think you can use AI to create a food safety plan, no, you cannot, right? It'll give you the path, right? Of here's the basic things you need to be considering. And I think that's to your point, Dustin, is it's going to help you open up your perspective and say, have you thought about this? And this is what comes from this source. And oh yeah, well, yeah, shit. That's important.
I think using AI in 2 ways is the best way to use it, which is one is to improve your thinking. So a lot of times I will write out whatever I'm doing or whatever, and then I'll say, what am I missing? Are there logical, one of the things I use a lot is, do I have logical conflicts within my argument? And I help it improve. The other is a help brainstormer. I would like to do a quality plan. Can you help me think through the things I need to do research on to go build my plan? It gives you research. Then you build your plan. You can put that plan back into AI and say, am I missing anything? But I think those who use AI blanketly are going to, at least at this point in AI, are going to not succeed.
Right. Yeah. It's not a replacement. It's a tool.
Exactly. It's like the internet was or is.
Yeah. It's like I'll put this in the check because I'm having fun with this. I think it's AI. Perplexity.ai is an amazing search engine. And so if anybody hasn't used that, you can use it for free. It's a lot of fun. Play around with Perplexity.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of AI. Yeah, but that's a separate conversation.
So fantastic conversation here. So we're at about the 5-minute mark now, Dustin. Let's kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level. What are some of the key messages, some of the key points you'd like to bring to the table here for our closure?
Well, first, for all of those of you guys who are in QA, I think you do a thankless job for the most part, and I do want to thank you on behalf of all the consumers out there, because I do think what you do is incredibly important. So that's number one. I think a lot of times quote unquote thankless jobs, it sometimes gets frustrating because the people aren't listening to you and you realize the importance of what you do. The best thing I can take away from this is if you can communicate clearly, you can think about what the triggers are for the organization, spend time with your leaders, whether it's the CEO or your boss or whoever, understanding the trigger points for the company, the trigger points for your leader, what the company needs to do and how your role fits in there. I think you'll be so much more successful. Data, I can't tell you how much, and I'm a data guy, I can't tell you how much data I was inundated with on a daily basis. So I tell this in school, data means nothing. Analysis and takeaways mean a lot. So instead of bringing data, instead of bringing issues, what are the takeaways? What are the summaries? What are the summaries, etc. So be very thoughtful about your approach. Be very thoughtful about the critical issues. But again, don't be afraid if there is a big issue to scream from the rooftops until you are heard, because ultimately you are the safety net for the organization.
Yep, and don't cry wolf.
Don't cry wolf. Yeah.
Don't cry wolf. So I summarize. So data is not information, and you can't. And I see this mistake a lot with quality people is they'll bring a big ream of data and put it in front of somebody and say, "See," and they're like, "What?" Well, no. Look at all this information I have. It's obvious that this is what. No, it's not. Summarize it. Don't. If you remember.
If you remember in school, because my kids are going through this, my younger kids, like the 5-paragraph essay, right? And it was like the first paragraph is your key message, your key point. Start with your key message, your key point, everything else. I build decks daily. I always have an exec summary page. If they read one thing, what are the 3 points I want them to take away? They can go through the rest if they want, right? That's really, really important.
Yeah, and I learned that with quality reports when I would sit down with LTs. Is I would have the high-level quality report with the trends and what we're doing, and then a giant stack of data behind that. Because number one, the conversation never went the direction I expected. Because let's say there was something on the mind of the CFO. I would start talking about complaints, and then the CFO would say, well, how does this impact bottom line? Are we expecting a decrease in sales? And then the sales guy would say, no, we're going to hockey stick this or whatever. And then they would start getting in a fight. And then I would just have to kind of sit there and wait for them to hash out what they were concerned about and then get back onto what I was talking about. And that's fine. That's perfect. That's what you want, right? You're there to supply the information and your recommendations to your point of where you should be going. I like how you summarized the goal setting and strategy as we were closing out on this. Is you said, all right, what are the big rocks, right? What are the big rocks versus the little rocks? What are those things that we got to whack those big rocks down to little rocks? Be forward looking, right? We've emphasized this time and time again in our conversation here today. And consumer feedback is key to success because we're all here. All of us are here to make money. That's the measure of our success in meeting the needs of the market, right? We can set up all the beautiful systems internally that we want, but if we're failing in that objective, we're failing overall.
Forward looking. Well, I very much appreciate the opportunity. I will say to any of those on the chat, you can feel free to send them my information, Bryan, but I am happy to chat further and help in whatever way I can, but I wish you guys all the best of luck in this new and improved 2025, hopefully for all of us.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Dustin. This has been a fantastic conversation. And I know for quality people, this is the information that they're starving for. They need this type of information to be successful. So thanks for taking the time to share that with us.
Pleasure. Always enjoyed. Thanks, Bryan.
You bet. So a couple of things I'm going to throw in the chat, a couple of links. I got this question on LinkedIn here today. And so I wanted to throw this in the chat because, I haven't talked about this in a bit. Is somebody was like, hey, I'm curious about a particular subject. Do you have past chats that I can go back and look at to learn more? Yes. I have created a database. This is chat number 210, Dustin, that we've been doing this. So this is over 4 years. And I've created a database with every single chat. And for every single chat, I have the video recording, the transcript of the conversation, an MP3 that you can download and listen to in your car, and the notes for that conversation as well. So you can go back and then you can go through. I've created an Excel file and I add to this every week. And you can sort through and say, okay, I want to go back and listen to what Dustin had to say, or I want to see what Austin was talking about with food safety culture. You can also do it by topic. So you can sort through all that information and figure that out. So I put the link in there for that. So hopefully that'll provide some benefit. And of course, don't forget the locals group, right? Where we have free information on recalls and other fun information to keep CEOs like Dustin informed of what's going on out there. So thank you to everybody for joining the chat. Fantastic conversation, tons. This is what I love about it, Dustin, right? The interaction with everybody on the chat is just fantastic.
It's great. Appreciate everyone.
Yep. So we'll be back here, of course, next week on Friday at the same time. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next food safety chat, where I'll bring another amazing guest on to talk with you. But in the meantime, have a great weekend. Enjoy yourself, and we'll see you there. Have a good one, everybody.